Hello and welcome to Dick and Cherry Show number 3, Mating and Matriarchy. So to recap, this will be our third and final discussion in the animal model conversation we've been having over the past 2 shows. And just to give a bit of a refresher of what we're going through, and of course I have Richard Rall and Alison as our co-hosts. And just to kind of go over what we mentioned before and to bring you guys up to speed or to refresh some of the last points we made in the previous show, we were talking about animal models of bonding and the fact that there are differences in the hormones that facilitate bonding. And in women, for instance, and in females, there's the oxytocin facilitating bonding, while a lot of times in males, or in, for instance, prairie voles and other animal models, there's vasopressins involved. And so there's a curious relationship between those two, or how they deal with, or how they relate to bonding. That's the word I'm looking for. And let's have Alison recap a little bit of the previous show on that note.
Okay, so our first show that we did in this series, we covered game theory, and so basically mathematical models about how animals cooperate, which underline our social behavior. And then in the second episode of this, we talked about some animal models that are used in biology to model human behavior. I believe we covered wolves, we touched on primates a bit, and dogs, and a little bit about prairie voles, and each one contains an aspect of our own behavior. With dogs and wolves, the reason why biologists are looking at those two types of animals to model our behavior is because of theory of mind, and the new understanding that canine species actually seem to have more of a theory of mind than primate species. I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but apparently it's true. So a lot of our advanced socialization and theory of mind, they're starting to look to dogs to use as an animal model. And then with primates, we have the different ways that they socialize and structure their societies that could be used to give us a bit more of an insight into the way we do that. And then there are prairie voles, and prairie voles tie back into what Anna was talking about in terms of vasopressin and oxytocin. Vasopressin is the bonding hormone for male mammals. And there have been some studies into vasopressin in prairie voles and how it changes the behavior of prairie voles. There's a certain species of vole that bonds to its partner. The male bonds to a sexual partner. And then there's a species of vole where that doesn't happen. And they have found out that vasopressin expresses itself different between those two species of voles. And then there's some preliminary evidence that that's also the case with human males as well. They found that those human males that have difficulty maintaining relationships or are more promiscuous have not as strong an expression or maybe an intolerance to vasopressin in the brain. So those are the things that we've been covering. And today I think we're just going to go into primate models. And,
that's right.
Yeah. So one thing I was going to say real quick is, the thing with the dogs versus primates and things like that is that there are a lot of things that we learned from primates, but then there's this point at which males, human beings, started to kind of deviate from primates, and finding that area of human behavior is where we can start using other models such as dogs, because it's like when we see we want to look at the ways in which humans are deviated from our non-human primate ancestors in behavioral patterns, and that's why dogs are useful, is because the way in which they deviate from wolves and some of the things that basically kind of civilization and larger groups and things like that, the way that those things modulate behavior, that's how this by using multiple models of different animals, we can look at different aspects of sets of behavior. And of course, as we were why we were talking about game theory in the first place is because basically that's where these different sets of behavior come from, is it's over a long enough periods of time, interactions of groups kind of work out in a way that shapes behavior. So that's how you end up with these behavioral models, because it just kind of finds the best way for groups to work together after competition and different pressures like that start to have their effects over longer periods of time. So yeah, where were we going from here?
Well, speaking of primate models, and to kind of piggyback off of what Alison was saying and use a segue bridge here, humans are primates. Let's say that, and let's ignore what you just said and basically go back to the idea that the normal sort of the original blueprint, or I don't know what to call it.
Well, there's just a huge amount of behavior that does also match with primates as well. That's why, but it's just when you want to get more refined and find some of those differences between things, then you start
right.
Looking at different models.
Right. Yeah. But let's. I was just trying to get us a little back towards the first. So before it deviated, let's look at sort of the baseline model of primates, of humans, and Alison mentioned that that's something that's been found in males, that vasopressin sensitivity or whatnot is also relevant in human males. So could you touch on vasopressin and cool stuff like that has to do with human hormonal secretions?
Okay, well, it's been a while since I personally. I mean, there was actually kind of a project for me a few years back. I've forgotten a little bit of it, but I brushed up just a little bit here. But there's an interesting thing with so oxytocin and vasopressin are present in both males and females. Vasopressin is it's also known as antidiuretic hormone. So basically, it keeps you from it keeps you from peeing out all your moisture, and it. But the thing is, there's actually called something called diabetes insipidus, where a person doesn't produce enough vasopressin, and so they're constantly urinating and losing a lot of their moisture. But
doesn't it also get affected by alcohol? That's why there's some a thing where the more you drink beer or whatever, the thirstier you get because of it's changing the imbalance of your kidneys, and that has to do with vasopressin.
If I'm just going on old memories, I think maybe I just don't really remember, so I can't really comment. But some of the things that I do remember as I was going through some of my old links and things like that, I just kind of ran through them really quickly. Is that there is the oxytocin. Well, first off, I've got an article that we'll make sure to link in the low bar here, but it's the testosterone and oxytocin actually work together in human males. They found them. They were studying some hunters in the Amazon, or maybe it was was it Amazon or Papua New Guinea? I don't know. We usually use those populations to look at more ancient behaviors, but basically like when there's this successful hunter testosterone release that occurs, and then apparently when they're on the way back from the hunt, they also release oxytocin, and it's important it plays an important role in social bonding. Like for instance, oxytocin in both males and females is it ends up being it increases trust in various studies where they've had people, they've looked at the way in which they trust another individual with, money or things of that nature. And usually they'll actually deal with a person in a more trustworthy fashion under the influence of oxytocin. And so oxytocin has an extremely important role in the functioning of social bonds. And then also one of the other things that we found that I dug back up just recently is that that it's funny that it's actually related to how well you sleep, because they actually like excised what's it called? The pineal, which is where melatonin is produced. They excised the pineal gland in animals, and they actually saw oxytocin and vasopressin drop. And then, but then whenever they added melatonin, they saw them go back up. So there's a pretty direct relationship between your sleep and the release of oxytocin and vasopressin. But So vasopressin, however, it actually it's related more to stress response. In other words, it goes down and there's a lot of release of various stress hormones related to vasopressin. So it's kind of downstream of vasopressin. What you're looking at is there is one of my main interests is the kappa opioids in the brain, and the role that they play in fear responses, anger, and addiction, and it just all throughout the brain. The kappa opioids, which are actually they're basically the opposite of mu opioids, which are associated with pain relief directly. Kappa opioids are also associated with pain relief, but in a way that is there's an opposition of the effects of those two, even though they're both called opioids. So trying to not get too far off track here, the point is that that vasopressin is actually very strongly associated with stress responses, and stress responses sometimes can be associated with dopamine kind of reward. So there's the reward system, which is more like rewards behaviors, and so I think that is the way in which we're seeing that the bonding from vasopressin is occurring is kind of as a reward system, more than the trust and bonding and kind of a relaxed state, sort of bond. And let's see if I can go over the what was going on here in this particular study of the humans in the Amazon and the hunting. But we'll move on to that in a bit. But some of the other things that I guess we could get to is let's see. Some of the interesting things they found is that male bonding, like bonding between males. So moving on from the fact that oxytocin is an important bonding hormone in males as well, is that they found that male bonding between primates is actually what is kind of the deciding factor between whether primates can live in large groups or not. And so there's some interesting things they found with male bonding in general, as the way in which complex societies are capable of forming in primates. And what's interesting is that whenever there are more males in a group, the females actually start to become more dominant, and so there's some interesting dynamics that happen there, that as the mix of the sexes occurs in primates, the ways in which the females start to how they start to act. Okay, Alison, you want to say something?
Yeah, actually, I was curious if vasopressin underpins bonding in human males as well, because I guess this is relevant to matriarchy versus patriarchy versus small p matriarchy versus small p patriarchy, as applied to animals, not whatever the feminists turned matriarchy and patriarchy into. But does vasopressin actually underlie bonding between male animals or male?
See, that's the thing, is I haven't been able to look into this deeply enough recently to remember exactly what the difference in the roles between oxytocin and vasopressin. I think from what I remember, there is some relationship of bonding, some associations between bonding and vasopressin. However, the role that it plays and the way in which it encourages bonding is kind of what I'm talking about here, that it may be that the oxytocin pathway versus the vasopressin pathway, you may have two different ways in which bonding is occurring. And so whereas they'd both be associated, there's kind of like, okay, for instance, like one of the things that they associate with being in love is both related to stress hormones as well as oxytocin many times. So, and part of that, basically the stress of a new relationship is often there's no doubt that people they're fucking out of their goddamn minds, in new relationships, because there is a there's a type of stress that is also positive, and it is basically, it's a reward system. And so people like that are, brand new love, they kind of have an addiction to each other because they're amping up their reward system. So I would say definitely in that phase of courtship, etc. Given that it's strongly related to stress response and things of that nature, and basically, going through the reward pathway, I would say that it's certainly related to bonding at the very at the very least, the bigger beginning part of it. However, when it comes to trust relationships and oxytocin, like I said, it was about 7 years ago that I was really looking into this. It relates to a lot of other systems in the way in which a person in a more relaxed, cooperative state of mind over the long period is going to, you end up finding oxytocin plays a huge role in that, whereas the more stressed out individuals have a hyperactive kappa opioid system, which is actually what is kind of related more to vasopressin. So what I'm saying is the stress system, and through both kappa opioids, which are related to fear, anger, things of that nature, they're actually more closely related to vasopressin, whereas oxytocin tends to block off the fear response, and you end up finding there's like a differential effect between oxytocin and vasopressin, and that they're kind of in opposition to each other in a lot of different circumstances. And so, like for instance, like I'm talking about here, where kappa opioids then really lead to higher vasopressin response, which then also mediates some of the stress hormones. The oxytocin can actually block the kappa opioid response, which once again I was saying is part of fear, and then that can then reduce vasopressin. So there are these systems where it seems as though a more stressful but rewarding part of bonding may be what we're looking at with vasopressin, whereas the more long-term relationships sort of bond that we see in humans is usually going to be mediated through oxytocin, and they tend to be in opposition to each other to a certain extent.
Right.
So,
I found that interesting, though, what you were saying, that we do know that oxytocin is something that I don't want to say that women predominantly have, but it is a predominant way of bonding among, the female brains is what they release.
It's one of those things that's still kind of under study. And so when we first were running into oxytocin a lot, we saw, oh, well, this is, it leads to, the uterine contractions, and, we were using it specifically for, helping during birthing. And then we found out that they're using too much of it during birthing can screw things up, and so there was there's a process of learning about these neurochemicals that is still going on.
Right. Yeah. And in general, oxytocin, as you're saying, there is obviously a complex interplay between the two, but they are interesting outliers, such as one, vasopressin pops out during certain things, and then oxytocin pops out during others. And it's interesting that, so let's say oxytocin we've found that it has to do with bonding and long-term sort of loyal, deep love, trust of your, partner or whatever. But on the other hand, we also have what you just mentioned, that vasopressin seems to be related to male bonding. So it's interesting that there is the stress hormone is the one that is modulated, or it's the stress hormone that relates to male bonding. So could you elaborate a little more on the male bonding there with vasopressin that you mentioned?
Well, the thing is, it's I'd have to go into this a little more deeply to remind myself of a lot of the many years old information, and so I don't know that I'm prepared to go deeply into the vasopressin discussion.
We could actually create its own show and just on
or I could
just
at least
bonding.
do a recap kind of report on it if it's something that next time we'll go away, and at the beginning of like the next show I can kind of do like a quick rundown on it.
Well, yeah, the next show is going to be on autism, so it could potentially be related to that as well. And
Oh,
Alison,
oxytocin is very directly related to
right,
autism. So
right.
yeah,
And so we could
it will lead kind of seamlessly towards it.
exactly be a nice segue, piggyback as well. And Alison did link a study here that we'll be including there's a gene variant that modulates vasopressin, and that it is strongly tied to how well men fare in marriage. In terms of quality of marriage that is reported by their wives, and as well as strength of the bond that they experienced with their partner. So their vasopressin in men in particular seems to be an indicator of how strongly they bond.
Yeah, it seems that men a lot of times respond to dopamine based, reward systems and things like that. In general, that's kind of where men are a little more dopamine seeking. It seems as though women are a little more serotonin seeking. So there's an interesting interplay there between whose preferred chemical is whose.
Yeah, and you did link, I think here that will be also including of the more native peoples here, islanders. It looks like that there's an interesting relationship between oxytocin and testosterone, and we also do know that recent research has been uncovered that male testosterone levels drop in the presence of female tears. So when women are sad and they're crying, there's something in the smell or whatever of the tears actually drops male testosterone production, or not production, but how much testosterone their body's producing at the moment. And so there may be an interesting relationship in that sense between oxytocin and testosterone that I would definitely like to explore more in the following shows. So yeah, basically that was kind of a recap and a bit of an addition, and I guess teaser for the next show of the vasopressin and that sort of discussion here. But I'm over. Go ahead.
No, actually, since the show was really on, I guess, matriarchy and mating. But I thought we were gonna. Are we gonna cover like primates as well, or?
Yeah,
well, the
we've got a couple of different studies we can look at here that are interesting because what I like looking at here is the way in which, like I was starting on earlier, how there you have a more dominant behavior in the same types of primates depending on the balance of males and females in the groups, and I think that's an interesting dynamic there that we might actually see in humans as well, where you have and it's going to be related to okay, so human beings have kind of been, men have been doing the riskier jobs and going to war, and so the balance of males versus females has usually been offset a bit. In other words, the birth rate, females I think are born just slightly more frequently than males. I think I'm not entirely certain about that. But then there's also, when you have the impact of war and risky behavior such as hunting big things, you end up having a lower male to fewer males in relationship to the females, and so it's interesting that here we have once we have civilization where there's not as much war, then you're going to have this change in the dynamic, and there's all these systems in the background that that according to the the environmental cues, how different genes can actually be turned on and turned off, and so you end up having different behavioral sets that will come into play.
Okay, just to speak to I know that there was a notification, but just to speak to the primates vasopressin, apparently they're now looking into primate models with vasopressin and oxytocin and prolactin and all of the hormones that govern pair bonding and paternal and maternal behavior, and apparently, and this might be a limitation for chimp models. There are only a few other types of primate, fairly small primates. I think marmosets are one that actually do have this kind of a level of vasopressin that would be of interest as an animal model for human behavior, and engage in the kind of paternal that they want to study, in humans. So I just wanted to point that out that might actually represent a limitation in on the conclusions we can draw when we look at a chimp model versus a human society model.
Yeah, and one of the things that they found, on that, going back to the whole dogs versus, primates thing, in one of the things that they found is in domesticated dogs, there's much higher oxytocin levels. So it's repeatedly, you find that the oxytocin is strongly related with cooperative behavior in general, and so there's a interesting set of circumstances there with how that all works. So it comes down to trust. So here's the thing. So in a situation in which you have a lot of individuals which are at odds with each other and attempting to compete, so say for instance in an environment where there are not enough resources to support the group, then you're going to have more competitive behavior, and so there's going to be modulations to what hormones lead to, what sets of neurochemicals, and therefore what behavioral models get turned on and off. So there's
well, yeah, exactly. To bring it back to why we're discussing more than just primates and the fact that there could be limitations, that's exactly as we were saying. There is a preset sort of, or a baseline where we may have evolved from, where that could have been our instincts, but civilization has changed things. Things are different, and so we may have to look at, for instance, emperor penguins, where the husband, basically the male, takes care of the egg. There are certain situations that we now have as fathers or stay-at-home fathers, and things like that we may look at different animal models, because the chimp model may actually be limited by the fact that they are in their environment and only that environment, and they haven't evolved. We did, so they're kind of staying there in their very harsh or very rigid mating and bonding tactics and hormones.
Yeah, and things that are designed for smaller groups, basically. There's behavioral models that will work for a small group are not necessarily applicable to a larger group, and vice versa. And so like for some of the things you were talking about here, like they used to believe that that the females they were always the loving kind of, except now they've found that there's female-led infanticide, where they go and to other and go and kill the babies of other chimps, and they found that in the wild, and and then they've been finding all this female competition and aggression, all these things that they in the past didn't, they kind of had an overly simplistic view of the male and female roles, and now they're finding that depending on the mix of males versus females in a group, and a few different factors, how the females will behave can change. You were going to say something, Alison?
Yeah, actually, I was gonna ask Anna where she was going with the matriarchy and mating title. What was that?
Well, I just used mating instead of bonding to have alliteration. But yeah, the idea was to recap the bond, or basically talk about a little more on bonding, vasopressin, all of that, and then to kind of go into matriarchy theory, as I call it, because there's an idea that, I even heard this on some sort of YouTube TV show the other day. Not a TV show, but I'm loosely calling it that because a lot of people get their news and their commentary from YouTube now. So there was somebody saying, oh, we don't really have that many animals that in the wild that have matriarchy, and so I just had to call bullshit on all that, and wanted to this is a good segue to basically go into, like Richard was saying, there are female-led infanticides. There are ways in which male bonding versus female bonding is a thing. It's how primates, for instance, deal with. So let's just basically break down the idea of what is male bonded and what is female bonded, or as they're calling, male dominated versus female dominated. And I think that's a misnomer, because it is actually about bonding, and it is about the whole point of it. So let's just start from the top. The whole point of why species would want to be female bonded versus male bonded or dominant has to do with preventing incest. And I believe we touched upon it in the last show, but the idea is, how do you not breed with your relatives when you've like grown up with them and they're around you, and you're like, well, which one can I breed with, which one I can't? And so animals have developed ways of separating from their family members in a way, in order to keep from inbreeding. And so you will have what is called male dominant, which is, I prefer male bonded, because you have the core group that stays together, which is the males of the species, and then they bring in females from the outside, versus a female bonded or female dominant system, where you have the women, the matriarchy, the line of grandmother, mother, daughter, granddaughter. They stay together and they bring in alpha males and beta males from the outside. And those are two very major ways of bonding or dominance. I just hate calling it that, because it's about bonding. It's about which group stays together, and which gender stays together. And it's interesting that people say that there's no matriarchy in the animals, and that they're all just, because they see the alpha male and they're like, oh, he's big and lumbering and look how he swatted that female. But they don't understand that it is actually prevalent in animal models, that it is, a lot of them are female bonded, especially in macaque and the monkeys and primates. The idea is that the women stay together, and that male, the alpha male who comes in, who looks all big and scary, he's there entirely at the sufferance of those women. And I believe Karen has mentioned upon this, a few years back, that, that alpha male, he may be alpha in the moment, and he does have to have displays of power and strength and swat the occasional female so that they think twice before disposing of him, but they very much can, and they will. And that's why they have the beta males, etc., around in order to take over the alpha, and the males themselves are also trying to take over the alpha.
Yeah,
so
they've got to display their strength repeatedly. If they don't display that they're a fit mate, they'll just be kicked out, or they'll just be replaced. And it's like for instance with lions, the male lions can't maintain their body weight via hunting. They actually kind of rely upon the females for the hunting, and but the thing is, they have to go and steal the kill. If they don't show their strength and their ability to overcome the females by stealing the kill from them, then they're not going to maintain the body weight and the position that makes them appear dominant, but they are still very dependent at the same time. So there's this interesting dominance, and dependence going kind of hand in hand thing with especially lions. It's really interesting to watch them mate, because like the female actually like harasses him into mating, and then when he tries to mate with her, she'll turn around and start attacking him, even though she's harassing him into mating.
Yeah, she's presenting and in every way flirting, and just basically shoving her genitalia in his face, and then when he goes to mate, there's a last minute turn around and bite at him moment to see if he can overcome that.
That's cats. Cats are just like that.
Yeah, it's the strength testing thing, though, and it kind of there's one of the other things that's interesting in the male bonded versus female bonded, and this is not so much directly scientific as much as scientific.
It's scientific as shit.
Yeah, it's all scientific as shit. No, it's not as much scientific as much as my own kind of noticing some behaviors between the different groups. Is that you end up having with the female bonded societies and primates, you have a tremendous amount of pressure on social interaction, and there are a lot more. There's the group competition. Competition within the actual group itself is a great deal higher, and they seem to be. You'll find them that female bonded societies a lot of times are occurring in the desert conditions where pure competition is what they actually create. Where even the babies will fucking practically kill each other in species that are female bonded. Not just primates, but in general. Like you've got what are they called, the meerkats, for instance, and or in what's some of the other ones, the hyenas, and what you end up having is the great deal more competition, because only there is no room for any kind of genetic divergence, because that's basically why is it that you would not have just pure competition? Well, you want genetic divergence, and you want the genetic to make room for enough different new genetic attempts, within your species, to be able to, exploit as many different niches as possible, and explore them. Whereas, in a desert condition, you just want to stick with what works, and that's it. And, and make sure anything that is not sticking with that, just dies immediately. And so you find that these, these animals that are in desert conditions, they're hyper aggressive, competitive, and whereas, animals that are a little bit in conditions where it's more jungle like, or at least has a lot greater availability of resources, then they actually are, they end up having a lot more cooperative behaviors, and you'll find that the male bonding model tends to dominate in those situations where you have more room for everybody to be relaxed and and taking care of each other. And so you, like, for instance, I think it's in baboon, in a lot of the baboons, where they'll just like leave the old behind, and and if a baby can't make it through the water that they're wading through, well, fuck you die.
The mothers abandon. I believe it is baboons. The mothers abandon.
There's different baboons too. That's the thing. Different breeds of them.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned hyenas, because that actually reminded me of exactly which show it was. I don't want to throw Joe Rogan under the bus, but I will. He said that only hyenas are matriarchal, and I have to call him on that, because no. So what about matriarchy and all that? There's at least 5 strong matriarchal animal species that are just matriarchy. They're just the women are in charge, and it's not just hyenas with their oversized fake penises that they hump the males with. That's a bit of an egregious example, and it does exist. But for instance, bees are matriarchal. The social structure of a beehive is that there's a matriarchal family headed by a queen. The queen has a potential lifespan of 3 years, and during that time, she continuously lays eggs, and thereby establishes and maintains a total colony population. And all of them are basically her children. And the males are drones. That's what they're called, drones. And they go out and they harvest things, and they build, and they are little worker robot bees. You want to know what I say?
I think the main bulk of it is female, though. In other words, like, you've got one queen, and then I thought the main bulk of the bees that are doing all this stuff with the hive are female.
It may be true.
Yeah, the drones are female. I actually, sorry to interrupt, and I know that there are matriarchies, because I guess you could say bonobos or matriarchy. And there was actually a interesting case study, apparently, of a true matriarchy in human history, and we can get into that. But I just wanted to pull back to what Richard was saying. So you're saying that matriarchal species tend to happen in extremely competitive environments where there can be no deviation from survival.
Yeah, where it's like, basically they in other words, like, if you look at it as like the males express the competition, but the females tend to provide the impelling force, the impetus for it. In other words, where the impetus is provided by the females, but the competition occurs between the males in certain circumstances. So it's so in other words, it's kind of like that whole thing of asking, who's in control of the taxi cab, the driver or the passenger. There sometimes it's a little it may be easy to simply say, oh, the guy that's in the front seat, that's the one who's in control. Well, not necessarily. And the same thing is true of a lot of relationships, where people just see the guy as being in control, and the truth of the matter is he's the taxi cab driver. And so it's there is kind of a interesting relationship there between the female bonded societies and the level of competition that occurs. And you may actually see more competition occurring, violent competition occurring between the men, but it is because of the necessity of that is set up by the group of females. That's the reason why they are more competitive, is because of the group dynamic.
I do have interesting stuff on how group dynamics actually cause or influence matriarchy or patriarchy. So I very much would like to get into that as well. But just to clear my name a little bit here, I looked up what I was getting confused about. So it looks like Worker bees are the women, females rather, in the colony, and they lack full reproductive capacity that the queen has, and so the females basically are worker bees. However, the drones are the male bees that are products of unfertilized eggs, which I don't even understand what that means. But unlike the female worker bees, drones do not have stingers. They do not gather nectar and pollen. Their primary role is to mate with the fertile queen. So we do have worker bees are female and they work, and the drones are male and they're basically a stunt cock, or I guess they're reduced down to their genitalia for their breeding
Yes,
capacity.
they're semen carriers.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. They're semen sacs.
I just find it fascinating that what Richard is bringing up about matriarchies actually being violently competitive, and a lot of the case violently competitive because of the influence of the female bonding and because that's sort of, I mean, it has the obvious parallels, and you're talking about desert societies, desert conditions with low resources, creating these highly female bonded communities which exert incredible reproductive pressure on males, which make violent competition. What the hell are we talking about here?
I don't know. I don't see any parallels here at all. I don't know what you're talking about there, Alison.
But I wanted to also just talk about, and this is just to move it away from that particular parallel that there is none of. In I think South America, they actually found evidence of a matriarchal, like a real matriarchal culture, where the women were the priestesses, the leaders, and so a genuine matriarchal culture. And what was interesting is apparently that matriarchal culture experienced a resource shortage and then disintegrated into an incredibly violent and bloody civil war. And which ties right into what you're saying about matriarchy being extremely violent. And in a lot of cases, this high degree of bondedness between women resulting in a very high degree of selective pressure on men, which creates additional violence.
In addition to that, one of the things that goes on is that in male bonded societies, there's not as much, let's call it upward mobility for a positive thing, or let's call it constant interpersonal war. You can look at it in two different ways, and that is that in a structured male bonded society, what you have is there's less opportunity for constantly clawing at your social position in the primates that we look at. And whereas like in the female bonded society, they're always clawing for position, just nonstop. There's always this, they watch each other like crazy, and the slightest slip up in the way in which your social behaviors are expressed can mean instantly the group attacking you. Just the slightest social faux pas, whereas you don't find that in the male bonded societies in which in primates, specifically male bonded primates, where there is much less interpersonal pressure because it's a more structured society, and so that creates stability. So it's like there's this kind of a give and take between creating a structure and the ability for for more successful individuals to actually rise through the hierarchy, because being able to rise through the hierarchy is basically a higher frequency of warlike conditions. And so looking at the ways in which different groups interact, and the ways in which these where like one family will fall to the bottom or rise to the top quickly, and things like that in like macaques, for instance, versus the way in which there's just kind of a stable society that occurs in the male bonded things. Like I believe gorillas are male bonded. I'm not sure right off the bat, but I'm pretty sure that whenever you have the huge males,
I can give you a big example of this. Bonobos versus chimps. And there's some apostate biologists who actually express the fact that they hate working with bonobos, and they much prefer working with chimps because chimps are more laid back than bonobos. And the big difference between chimps and bonobos in terms of bonding is bonobos tend to be more female bonded, whereas chimps are more male bonded. And how that actually expresses itself in practicality is that most of the time spent grooming in a bonobo society will be between two females, and most of the time spent grooming in a chimp society will be between two males. And the thing is that bonobos get this incredible, I don't know, rosy, Vaseline smeared lens look at them by a lot of people. But the people who actually work with those the species or the subspecies of primate, many of them actually really fucking detest working with bonobos, because bonobos are fucking, apparently they're really tense, really high strung, whereas the chimps are just, you know, they're relaxed, do whatever. And the thing with bonobos is they will do things like if a bonobo pisses off another bonobo, particularly if a male bonobo pisses off a female bonobo, they will chew off their fingers. I'm not even sure if chimps do this, but they do it for the obvious reason is it's maiming, and also they won't be able to swing or move about in the canopy. So it's like bonobos are not the peace and love chimp that they're made out to be.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
so it seems like
interesting.
they may be a lot closer to humans as well.
Yeah, well, they
Yeah,
are
I think
closer
that, so they may be
genetically.
a better model of humans than
Well, you
chimps.
know, it does make sense that they would be a little more high strung, because the whole thing about bonobos or bonobos, however, is that they have, the way they're described is they use a sexual interaction to alleviate tension. So if you need that strong of an oxytocin flow to alleviate tension, you may be really fucking tense. And what I've seen of bonobos, of the videos on YouTube, sometimes they get a little squeaked out, because there is an element of I would call it pedophilia even. And a lot of times you have, on all these situations that are described as how they use sex to disseminate tension, is that one woman, one female will rub her genitals on another female's shoulder, or like on another female's genitals, or a older female will rub her genitals on the shoulder of a younger male that she may have slighted. And I have personally seen videos of older grown females having sex with little boy children. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, they basically there is the sexuality does not, it crosses the age borders within bonobos. Yeah,
Right,
so,
but it seems to be female led, and not necessarily, you
oh,
know,
yeah, you
basically
actually got a point there.
current society, as in like a young boy who has sex with an older teacher is lucky guy, but you know, a young girl of the same age having sex with a male teacher of the same age is just fucking kill him now. Yeah, that sort of thing.
So basically, bonobo society is like our juvenile detention centers.
Exactly, that's what it really looks like. That
Everything is explained now. Everything is clear.
But
well, I know,
yeah, I did want to bring back up at this point that, you know, there are these studies that there's numerous studies about how larger societies require more male bonding, and that it's that the larger groups, the larger the group is, the more important male bonding is for primates. So, you know, just kind of putting that out there.
well, I do actually have something on that, but you know, there is this idea to back up on the animals and to talk about parallels that do not exist. There's a National Geographic article here of the fact that the females, that's the title, females are dominant sex, primate study suggests. And some of the things that they're talking about here is that, you know, scientists usually believe that communal living is beneficial to females because a ready food supply is crucial for successful reproduction. A primate sisterhood would be better equipped to locate and defend food resources than individual animals. So for males, access to females is considered the major factor influencing reproductive success. So operating as an unattached free agent as a male may be the best approach. And so here we have patterns laid out for how and why female dominance or female bond societies flourish, in fact, because it is beneficial for the women to gather together and to gather resources and to, you know, we know a lot of animals have a mother and child, while the father, God knows who, like bears, like, you know, like polar bears, etc. There's a lot of animals that, or like bobcat bobcats, the woman ends up raising her child as a single mother. That ends up being a frequent thing. So for those women to band together and to help each other raise their children and to gather food together is a smart choice. And here, Lyndon Force is one of the researchers here, is talking of the studies, talking about that number of females that this free agent can impregnate is what matters the most for reproductive success. So the males should go where the females are. And so you have this, once again, alpha male who gets to breed with these girls, and, he's just so terrible. But in fact, he's the one having to follow them around and be sort of at their mercy. And especially the fact that females can synchronize their receptive periods is kind of a adaptation for this, that all females in a group become receptive within a short period of time. And so the male has to basically come in at that time, and then he can, fuck off. But it also becomes increasingly difficult for a particular male to monopolize matings. So here they're saying that as a result, most females are able to mate with several different males. So not only are they synchronized and receptive, but there are a bunch of free agents that are free to battle it amongst themselves for the pleasure of the Coliseum viewers. So there's just a lot of interesting stuff that girl power isn't a 20th century invention at all. It is very much a primate invention, where females bond together, they collect resources, and they open themselves up to males during only specific times, and all the rest of the time they're going to chase them off. They're going to potentially maim them if they can because there's strength in numbers in primates. That's one of the biggest things. So female bonding, female dominance is actually an extremely common thing, and in fact it's a preferred method of evolution. Well, not evolution,
well, in these small groups. So that's the thing. It's like it's
a common thing. It's a more common thing. I don't know if it's preferred. I don't think evolution prefers anything. It doesn't give a shit.
Right.
Well, actually, there is kind of a showed preference, but if you're talking about any kind of conscious thing here, no. But there is a preference for, like, whenever if you want to make sure that a species, the whole reason why you want differentiation of species is because the more you have of one particular genetic model, the more susceptible it is to disease and dying outright. And so any system that continues, which is life itself, has to have these ways in which it does the maximum amount of differentiation to avoid catastrophic failure. But at the same time, then there also has to be the specialization. So that's kind of the breadth and depth search. There has to be the specialization into the various niches, so that it can be, because of the competition between things, you have to make sure that you're not exploring so wildly that it's into uselessness. So I'm sorry, I'm speaking very generally here because I'm trying to relate, a lot of different concepts, but that we find in the growth and pruning models that we see all throughout nature, and you find these systems. This is just it's a systems design principle, and it's a systems that continue require these certain ways of being, and that is, and so there is kind of a preference for, if there are more resources, then a little more differentiation is actually a preference, because it's seeking out additional models of life that can then occur. So there actually is a preference between staying with just the smallest number of models, which is why you find fewer species in the desert, and way more different. You got 40 different kinds of the same bird, in the rainforest, and they're all doing their silly dances and shit like that. That they can basically they can get away with all of these weird behaviors and shit like that because there are more resources. And that's kind of how humans even became possible, is we got this huge fucking brain that takes up just massive amounts of fat and things like that, and long periods of time. And if there weren't significant resources available to our ancestors to develop a large brain, then it wouldn't have been developed, because we could only explore. In other words, primates could only explore into the area of having a large brain to see if it's useful. if there were enough resources around. So, you know, when you have more resources, you have more ability to explore different genetic models and, you know, different things like that. So there is actually a little bit of a preference between the two, but, you know, it's not a conscious thing. It's just a systems design principle.
Yeah, and there's self-organization and things like that. And so I would really like to go back to what you were saying in terms of, well, mentioning as a caveat that, well, we're talking about small groups versus large groups. There is a difference when it comes to numbers or versus resources and things like that. So I actually found a really fascinating study here that is titled Female Dominance Over Males and Primates, Self-Organization and Sexual Dimorphism, and I'll be linking it as well. And the subject areas here says macaques, primates, rhesus, monkeys, lemurs, bonobos. So it seems to cover a variety of primates. And so here's an abstract.
Was Alison asking to speak again before we
Oh,
move on?
sure.
I thought she was. Maybe I'm reading an old thing here. Okay, I could be reading an old thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had.
Sorry, I was navigated away. Well, I'm actually I'm interested in what Anna has to say. I did want to point out something about because what you're describing there when you're talking about a female bonded societies is essentially a harem society, and it's interesting because we have this attitude, like Anna was saying, that we look at the alpha male. And we say, oh, this is a male-dominated society. Look at all of these females. They're herded into this little area, and they're not allowed to move around, and blah blah blah. But in being this almost this singular entity, they control so much of the selection of the male. Because if the male doesn't appeal to the harem, he's out. He's out.
He doesn't have a family. He doesn't have a support structure. There's no parallels here.
Yeah, there's no parallels here. None at all. None at all. Any human society. But if this male doesn't appeal, and he's only got a very narrow window, the bigger the more the harem, and the more they I think it's actually the females were probably restricting the movements of the other females to ensure that they have the most amount of selective pressure on the males. And if he doesn't appeal to them, because they represent so much a potential reproductive opportunity. If you're a harem and you're the only game in town, you're going to get whatever the hell you want out of those men or those male animals.
Well, the thing about female bonded societies too is like meerkats are a great example because of the way it was narrated. The Meerkat Manor is a fantastic sample for this, where you do have, as in bees, you have a queen bee, and the other females, for instance, in bees are not as reproductively developed. However, in meerkats, it's also and so the parallel is that you have a mother and the rest of her children. So in meerkats, you have the same thing. You have an alpha female, and she has an alpha male that she breeds with, and then she has a bunch of daughters, and because it's female bonded, and all those daughters aren't allowed to breed, and not that they're not physically capable of it. So she has to literally chase them away from males, and if she smells a male scent on one of her daughters, she will fuck her up to the point of kicking her out of the group to die.
Yeah, so, and being kicked out of the group in desert conditions means you die, period. So it is a death sentence. And so, like in the Meerkat Manor, you actually see where there's a female who dared she dared to be a little fucking slut.
Yeah,
so,
she was a little slut, and she
the mother, fucking beat her ass once, and then she did it again. The next time she kicked her out, which is a death sentence.
No parallels in human societies. There are no human societies in which the alpha female floats a rumor or expressly tells her male relatives to go, yeah, that chick, she needs to go because she's a little slut.
Not the parallels you're looking for.
Yes.
So,
good one.
You know, go into your
yeah, this is an awesome study, which is pretty epic, because we hear I like studies where it's the opposite of the experimenter effect, as in what they predict will happen is not what happens, and they're like, we were surprised to find. I always really like studies like that. So basically the processes, here's the abstract. So the processes that underline the formation of dominance hierarchy in a group, and this is primates, are since long under debate. Models of self-organization suggest that dominance hierarchies develop by self-reinforcing effects of winning and losing fights, the so-called winner-loser effect. And so the idea is that's why males are sexually dimorphic. That's why they're bigger. It is kind of a developed evolutionary thing because they're the ones fighting, and it's a dominance hierarchy of the males being bigger over the females, and so all of that is what they're referring to here as a dominance hierarchy. But according to the prior attribute hypothesis, dominance hierarchies develop from pre-existing individual differences such as body mass. In the present paper, we investigate the relevance of each of these two theories. So the theory is winner-loser effect or prior attribute hypothesis. So they're trying to figure out, why is there sexual dimorphism? Why are males bigger than females? Is it because they have to win or lose fights? Is that what is happening? The smaller ones lose, and so the bigger ones dominate over them? Or is it that they already were bigger previously for whatever reason, and that caused them to be dominant? So in fact, what they found is, however, to our surprise, we found none of these methods to be at work. And what they did find is self-organization hypothesis. So our model, based on the winner-loser effect, predicts that female dominance over males increases with the percentage of males in the group. So that's interesting too. Another element of no parallels here, that, as you mentioned, girls are born at a tiny bit of a fraction higher rate than boys, but we do have a strong preference societally in the East and the West, everywhere, but especially historically. We have preference for males to the point where, baby girls are murdered and all this other terrible misogyny because, males are worker horses. They can go to war, they can provide you with food, they can, work at a factory. If you have boy children, you can do more as a family. So we've had males preferred as children to have. And currently, I believe there are especially some societies like Japan and China where certain areas of China where there's just no females. And there's like, you go to a convention and there's like sexual health convention or whatever in Shenzhen in China, and there's like nothing but dudes, and one single hot girl shows up and there's literally a crowd of 300 taking photos of her because too many guys. So it is really curious here that we have a self-organization hypothesis where female dominance over males increases with the percentage of males in the group. So that's another really curious thing that I wanted to throw out there for discussion.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to speak to that because I think that a lot of female infanticide has nothing to do with misogyny, but actually female competition for resources. As horrible as it sounds, and incidentally, the rate at which women and midwives are killing male children is sort of a hidden secret there too, because the infanticide cuts both ways. But in reality, if you are a woman who wants to have more resources for herself, you are in competition with your daughters potentially, but not your sons. So there is that aspect of it as well that we don't like to talk about. It's like the meerkat thing. The alpha female is in competition with her daughters for resources. So if they step out of line, she chases them off or beats the crap out of them. So I mean, and like I said, I think a lot of this female infanticide comes down to women's competition with other women over resources. It doesn't really have to do with misogyny. I can't imagine a society in which men want to kill women. It doesn't make sense.
For a longest time, we just had simplified views of things where it's just where the ways in which females lead is like the taxi cab driver and the person actually paying. It looks like the guy who's driving is in control of the vehicle, but in truth, the woman in the back is who's in control of the vehicle. And so it's there's this confusion that people have had for long periods of time where they couldn't see who's actually in control because they couldn't understand one step, away. Well, they couldn't understand. I don't know exactly what to call it, but it is a subtle control instead of overt, and so just not being able to understand these subtle and secondary control systems and how they can even be more powerful, where the group is actually where you have these guys, they look like they're competing over the group of women, but the truth of the matter is they have to prove their value and kill each other off at the pleasure of the women, like a gladiator pleasing the crowd. And so it's they understanding what's in control there is you can easily choose the driver instead of the passenger, if you understand what I mean.
Well, I think there's an element that, you know, if we understood this more, we might know too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was the conclusions of the study that you were talking about again, Anna?
That female dominance over males increases with the number of males in the group.
Okay, so, which is interesting because we were talking about how female bonded groups tend to be more dominant. But I guess, is this a contradiction, or is it in different scenarios? Is this different species, or?
Well, I don't think necessarily, because I mean we do still have the idea is that these are primates, so they're still the same sort of groups that we were just talking about. So I think what we're talking about here is there is a core female bonded society, but the more males they add to them, such as, you know, so you have the alpha male, and then you have some sons that stick around until they're teenagers, and then maybe some errant males are coming in to like hang out and wait for the alpha to die or whatever. And so maybe the idea is the more of those that arrive to the group, the more women just control them more and more. So in other words,
yeah, well, there's overt versus, you know, subtle control. I think what it is that as the females start to as there starts to be you know, more of them, perhaps it's a they switch from the subversion, you know, type of model to the more overt model. And so there's definitely some mixed you know, things that can go both ways. You know, there's never it's never a single, it's this way all the time, you know, it's just this one, you know, things are the models are going to change as different group dynamics evolve. So yeah, I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense that as the not what, because what I was looking at is like female. So you were in the study that you're talking about, there was when there were a lot of males in the group, the females acted more dominantly, correct? Babe?
well, let me just pull it back up.
Because well, that's I found another study earlier. I have on my list of things here where it was like in groups in which there were relatively more males, the females behaved in a more dominant fashion. And I think that, see, the question is, whenever they're talking about dominance, you know, are they talking about aggression? Are they talking about overt controls versus, you know, more you know, group controls? Because I guess it's, instead of overt versus subversion, it's more like overt individual versus, you know, using the group's dynamic to control an individual, and you know, requiring certain sets of behaviors within the eyes of the group, or the group itself punishes the individual. And
is it a matter with more males they can exert more selective pressure? That's another question. I mean, because it's obvious. Like if you only have one male, you're sure shit out of luck if you don't like any particular quality that he has, because this is what you get. But if you have
you also could encourage a competition between the males too, because we frequently have, you know, this toxic masculinity hurts men too.
Yeah, it's just whenever there's more males, then it's like, yeah, it's a good question. It's interesting to look at.
There must be other factors, because there are some situations where the males would be cooperative and some where they'd be competitive. So imagine the general mating structure of the animals they studied. What were the primates that they studied?
The ones that are subject areas they're mentioning is macaque, rhesus, lemur, and bonobo, but which see, it jumps from introduction to results without necessarily seeing the methods, which is, oh wait, there's the methods. Haha, it's my favorite part. You have to look at the models and the methods. So collection data, empirical data, they have, looks like a lot of different primates. Oh yeah, so many species. In fact, it's over 30 species of primates that they were looking at here. So there's PowerPoint slides or PDFs or whatever to look at the actual collection and selection of empirical data here. And the results is that, let's see, at a high intensity of aggression, female dominance over males increases significantly with the percentage of males in the group, but only when males start with a higher initial dominance value than the females, and if there's a greater difference in intensity of aggression between the sexes. So, apart from this, the correlation appears robust for the degree of sexual dimorphism in initial dominance values. So at a low intensity of aggression, the correlation is absent. Okay, so
see, we could be looking at temporary effects because they're talking about like when it has a higher number of males, and so it sounds like it could be a transitory effect as well. I'd have to look into it more to give any kind of
yeah. I've linked it, and I can link it through our chat. And basically, it looks like they're not only looking at aggression as measures of dominance, but there's an element of sexual dimorphism. So they're looking at which one's bigger, the male or the female, and I think they're saying here that female aggression increases, female dominance, therefore aggression is how they measure it. So female intensity of aggression happens when the male is initially bigger. So when you have a big scary monkey coming into a group, it seems like females jump on his ass like a whole lot. Is layman's terms, seems like to me the bottom line here. But
you also have to ask, how did more males end up in the group? In other words, like for instance, if it's a female bonded society to start with, then they usually don't have a lot of males in the group. So how did they end up with more males in the group?
And I mean, they're looking across all the primates. So we're having different. It's kind of an aggregate of all the primates here. But in the discussion, so let's look at the discussion. So in our model,
I think I got it. If the first theory were correct, the research found that this is not the case. Instead, the second theory turns out to typically explain the female dominance as the relation between female dominance and the percentage of males can only be found among monkey species living in group with aggressive behavior that's sufficiently intense and frequent. So this is only a correlation in those monkeys that have intense and frequent aggression between males. So there already exists competition.
Mm-hmm. And so the more males are added to this competition, that even
once they basically it looks like there's kind of a runaway effect of once you've amped up the aggression to a certain level, then basically the females then have to amp up their aggression in response as well. It seems as though the group itself in its entirety starts to become more aggressive once there's kind of a point at which there is a lot of aggression within the males.
Well, yeah, exactly. In the discussion here, it says in our model, female dominance increases with the percentage of males, but only if there's sufficient difference in intensity of aggression between the sexes.
Okay, I just want to point something out. I'm not so sure if we can extrapolate this to human societies, because this is a really black and white look at dominance. Mm-hmm. Especially when they say one of the explanations for why this might be so is because there's so much male aggression, they get exhausted or defeated or injured in their male aggression, and then females can physically dominate over the injured and exhausted males. This doesn't capture the nuances of dominance and social interaction with humans.
Well, some of the citations here might, because looking at the discussion here, there's it says, so as I mentioned.
So yeah, just maybe one part of a larger picture that we're seeing here. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting effect here, but it's not. You can't get as much out of it as you might want to without looking at a lot of the surrounding information.
Right, as I was saying, I didn't get to finish.
I was setting you up, baby. Now just knock him down.
All right, thank you. Knock me down. In that case, a higher number of males leads not only to a higher number of interactions with males, but also to a sufficiently higher average intensity of aggressive interactions, so that more female dominance develops by a stronger hierarchical differentiation per sex. And there's 3 studies that link with that, to where we have at least 3 other studies that show, let's see which one, despotic egalitarian, an individual-oriented model on the emergence of despotic and egalitarian societies is one of the links of there. Then towards the integration of social dominance and spatial structure, animal behavior, and then female co-dominance in a virtual world, ecological, cognitive, social, and sexual causes. So these are the 3 links that have to do with the fact that they noticed sufficiently higher average intensity of aggressive interactions lead to that more female dominance develops through a stronger hierarchical differentiation per sex. So we're not just talking about, they're not looking at just aggressive behavior as forms of hierarchy, as form of dominance. I mean, they are also monitoring hierarchical differentiation. So if anything, this may seem that aggressive males increase female cooperation in the sense that they can overcome them, or you know, I'll be curious to look at these studies, and they're all by the same author, Hemelrijk.
Could you recap that, because I couldn't quite follow what you were saying there.
Well, I would love to. So this is in the discussion. We go to discussion, the results. Click on the little side thingy in the article and results, and then discussion. So it links other studies that are about, for instance, female co-dominance in the virtual world, and then individual-oriented model of despotic and egalitarian societies. And so here they're saying that in our model, female dominance increases with percentage of males, but only if there's a sufficient difference in intensity of aggression between the sexes. So already we have a difference in intensity of aggression between the males and the females. So we're not saying that both males and the females are hyper aggressive. That's not at all the case. It seems that specifically female dominance increases with the percentage of males when there is a strong difference between the
So
sexes.
when there's a strong difference between them, then they amp up their aggression in response. Because really what they're talking about is aggression. They're calling it dominance,
but
what
there's
they mean
more.
is aggression.
All right. In that case, and only in that case, a higher number of males leads not only to a higher number of interactions with males, but also to a sufficiently higher average intensity of aggressive interactions, so that more female dominance develops via stronger hierarchical differentiation per sex. Simultaneously, this leads to a society that resembles the society of despotic macaques. And at a low aggression intensity for societies that resemble egalitarian macaques, the correlation with female dominance is lacking because females remain mostly completely subordinate to males, even in groups with a higher percentage of males. So, when we have a super high intensity society, highly aggressive society, and there's a group of females versus males that have, you know, let's say the males are more aggressive than the females, and the males come in, the females become dominant. However, when we have a society that has low aggression in general, whenever more males come in, nothing changes. The females still stay subordinate. So this really strongly ties back to what you guys were saying of desert versus jungle conditions, basically, to me.
But also, I'd like to point out that there's a whole dimension of human interaction that's lost with this particular model. I'm starting to really cringe at this male-female dominance shit that I see in biology, because really, when you're looking at human societies, it's men and women cooperating to create a society, and the real interesting bit is how those societies win out or fail to win out over other societies. So because we got such a complex interaction of cultural elements, just limiting ourselves to the dominance of males and females in a group seems
via just aggression alone. I mean, it's really oversimplified.
Really oversimplified, and it just does not capture, like, it's just, first of all, it doesn't, like, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking this reflects no I've traveled quite a bit. I've lived in quite a few societies, or at least for a fair amount of time. This doesn't capture anything I've ever seen around the globe. This idea that, oh my God, the women and the men, now they're just spending the whole freaking time beating on each other. This is bullshit. For the most part, men and women spend 99.9% of their time working together. Maybe not so much in the West right now, but in general, they spend the vast majority of their time working together to create social systems for the betterment of their children.
Yeah, and when they look only at the aggressive behaviors with each other, they're not really looking at the relationship, and you know, there's so much more subtle cues.
And the other thing is that with humans, this idea that the dominance relationships between men and women encapsulate anything meaningful is retarded, because the interplay between males and females in a society, human men and women in a society, to create a successful society, is and how that society stacks up against other societies is much, much, much more meaningful. The competition between societies is much more meaningful for human beings.
And then you have group size that it just plays a huge part in this, and the group size of humans is just way, way, way beyond any of these other animals.
And the idea that we should look at the dominance of males and females rather than how they cooperate to create a successful society, not just a successful society, but a society that ends up growing and absorbing other societies and being successful either militarily or culturally or linguistically against other societies. That's more interesting to me. I imagine a society like this one where the males and the females can't cooperate, and they're constant unending class warfare against each other. It would be a society that we would have said goodbye to way back in the mists of history, because it was
You'd
so
think that, but I don't know.
No,
Sometimes.
but to this degree, like everything comes
Okay,
down
not to that degree, but we tend to devolve to that to some extent. So I don't know. I think it's still useful to some extent to see that there are ways in which we can devolve, and you know, in our behavioral sets, you know, towards these other shittier animal behaviors.
Imagine this society, like imagine this highly aggressive, everybody out for themselves, and you know, the females are only dominant because the males are killing each other and blah blah blah. Like imagine how quickly this society would be outcompeted by a society that's cooperative.
Oh yeah, but you know, you see that in places. There are places on this planet where they're chopping each other's hands off and shooting each other like crazy. And they can't get a group size beyond you know, beyond 10.
we're not. There's no parallels that exist in the world. I don't want to go to jail in Canada.
Yes, this is all just about the animals.
It's all just theoretical.
All just monkeys in the desert.
Yeah.
No parallels to any humans in any climes on the world. Anyway. Okay. All right. Moving away.
Any resemblance to persons real or is
purely coincidental.
Yes.
Coincidental. But I actually have to get going because I have a shit ton of stuff that I need to do. But this was fun.
Absolutely, that's a great cap off, since we've bottomed out on our matriarchy.
All the things have been discussed.
Yes, they really did, and maybe too much for some people's likings.
Maybe too much, maybe too far. But hey, we're playing around here. You know, we're messing with concepts. We're looking at things.
Ideas, and you know, just seeing what sticks.
Did you guys get some cancer in the chat or something?
Oh no, I'm not.
We're just playing around.
All right.
No, but you know, people can get uppity and take things out of context and say that, well, you were intimating that, you know, people in such
I didn't say anything, man.
Yeah, I didn't say anything. We were talking about primate studies that other people said. So I was just reading from a piece of paper, okay? So on that note,
but hey, speaking of talking about somebody else's stuff, I really recommend Dario Maestropuri. He's got a book called the first one was Machiavellian Intelligence. I really enjoyed that way back, and then apparently he's got another
recommended
one called,
reading
Games Primates Play, and he tends to delve into things that are not popular but but interesting, and so I always enjoy finding those authors and people who are persona non grata. Is that how that's said? I don't know. But you know, those people who piss people off, I tend to like looking at their stuff and seeing what it is that they have to say. Because if it's pissing people off, then you know, maybe there's a little too much truth to it or something. You know, I like looking into it.
You have to investigate for yourselves. And I definitely would recommend Machiavellian Intelligence, how rhesus macaques and humans taken over the world. And it was a really interesting read to just kind of get you up on the basics of the instincts that we may still have in there somewhere. And then, of course, you can move on from there. But it's a nice little, you know, baseline foundation of sort of understanding. His whole point is to try to understand why we have some behaviors as humans that we do that are also echoed in the primate world. And he has been a long-term primatologist. So it is always curious to have a perspective of someone who is intimately familiar with primates and tries to, you know, find parallels. You know, he doesn't say.
Yeah, anyway, it comes down to it. There's going to be parallels that are useful, and then there's going to be ones that are not. And so, you know, you have to, you know, everything you have to take with a grain of salt, and you know, you have to look at it and say, and don't get too salty. But you know, and just say it's like, okay, there are certain things here that have a, you know, just because the rule is only 60% reliable doesn't mean that it's useless. You know, there's 40% exceptions, but you know, there's still that 60% you know reliability in a rule. It's a soft rule, and so there's, you know, just there's kind of a usefulness versus, not that, you kind of have to be okay with looking at things and saying, that may be useful here, that may be not useful over there, and just kind of, taking all the information and trying to look at it from a larger perspective.
Well, that's why I recommend the book, because it actually does have an element of, he is not one of those people who is trying to explain everything about humans by comparing them to monkeys. In fact, he tries to very strongly communicate that we are, humans are sort of different and special, but then he's like, but look at this thing that monkeys do. Does it sound familiar? So, I appreciate his approach in particular, because it is a kind of, it is not a one for one, this is what we are, this is what everything is. It's kind of a, it's more about looking at a behavior that happens to be in both and seeing like, well, why does this behavior happen? What is the benefit? What is the evolutionary reason? Well, what is going on here?
And knowing why it is that we have certain emotions that and knowing that people do things for reasons that they may not be aware of, because there is some impetus that goes way back and that's making them feel emotional or have a drive, or it's like sex itself, when you look at it, is weird. I mean, why are you wanting to stick your thing in somebody else's stuff, and what the fuck is that? So it's any kind of like the desires that you have, looking at them from a perspective of, hey, there's some weird shit that you might not be aware of that's kind of driving you towards certain ideas and decisions and things like that. It's always a good idea to look at yourself and others from that perspective, that there may be some overarching things that might not be considered.
Yes, and I would normally recommend Venusian Arts Handbook for anyone who's interested in PUA type activity, but you could just read Machiavellian Intelligence, and that's actually better. So
and plus that's like really old and simplistic, and
it is.
The thing is like way oversimplified.
Of course,
really,
but
it's more for kids, I think. I don't know, or people who are very, very inexperienced.
Exactly. People who are inexperienced and who need a leg up, a little bit of an edge to just not be freaked out about it and never try. But on that note, we'll be talking about autism on our next show. So get your Spurg suits ready. We'll be spurging all over the place. So,
and I'll make sure to send you this. There's a YouTube video of Dario Maestro-Peri doing a talk. I'll send that to you so that you can put that in the low bar, because it's pretty cool too.
I believe I was actually going to mention it, but then I didn't. It's the one that says the second title that you mentioned, the games that primates play. Is that the talk that you're talking about? Yeah, cool. I've watched quite a good bit of that. All right, so yeah, that's on that note. We're wrapping up this broadcast now. We'll be going into the Patreon after show, and we'll be talking about fun, macaque, etc. related things there. So catch us on the flip side by joining patreon.com/honeybadgerradio or patreon.com/AnnaCherry. There is a tier specifically for the Hangouts called Honey Badgerkin. Yes, that is ironic, but also is it? So we'll see you guys next time on the same Honey Badger show, same Honey Badger channel, same Honey Badger time next month, and we'll be talking about autism. Finally, I know you guys have been waiting. It's coming. It's happening. So we'll see you guys then.
We're going to spurg out on autism.
Exactly. It's going to be great. I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you for joining us, and have a good weekend.